about endocrine system, we're looking at the cells, tissues, and organs that are responsible for producing chemical messengers. That's what we think about as hormones, these chemical messengers, and they bleed out these chemical messengers into the interstitial fluid that surrounds them, and then those hormones will diffuse into the blood, and then through the cardiovascular system they are distributed throughout the body. They have their activity then at what are termed target cells. These are cells that have receptors that are capable of binding the hormone, and following binding there's a response in that target cell to the hormone to the hormone message. And so target cells can be found anywhere in the body, and that means that a single hormone then can alter the metabolic activity of a number of different tissues or organs throughout the body, and it could have different effects in different cells. Generally, the effects are slow to appear, but when they do appear, they will often last for days or even longer. So what are the effects that we see associated with the endocrine system? Well, we can see chemical reactions speeding up or slowing down, so we can turn on or off chemical reactions by adding enzymes into the cell. We can see the movement of materials across cell membranes, so from outside the cell to inside, or within the cell, moving across a bit of plasma membrane. We can see changes or regulation of water and electrolyte balance, and as you move water and electrolytes around, then of course we see effects on blood pressure as well. And we can see changes in the regulation of the reproduction of cells and the growth and the development of cells. There are other controlling secretions in the body as well. Paracrine secretions are ones that are secreted into the cells or into the fluid, but their effect is at neighboring cells only. It doesn't go very far because these paracrine secretions generally are very quickly neutralized in the body. And autocrine secretions. An autobiography is a story about yourself. So an autocrine secretion is one that, even though it's secreted into the interstitial fluid, it only affects the cell that secretes it. So other types of secretions include these paracrine and autocrine secretions. So there's two basic types or groupings of hormones, and it's all based on their structure and the chemistry of those structures. Steroid hormones are ones that have been synthesized from cholesterol, and so here's an example of a cortisol is an example of a steroid hormone. So that's one group, and then the other group are the non-steroid hormones. Interestingly, when it came to naming hormone types, nobody got creative like we see in so many other body systems. So the non-steroid hormones are ones that are all synthesized from amino acids. So they are, and if you recall, amino acids are the subunits of proteins. So the amines, like, where's an example amine here? Norepinephrine is an example amine. It's derived from tyrosine, the amino acid tyrosine. So amines, small, built from a single amino acid. Peptides are short chains of amino acids. So if you recall, a peptide, we talked about these. Yeah, we haven't really talked much about peptides, but peptides are just, are amino acid chains anywhere from several amino acids long up to like 40, 60, even 90 amino acids. We could still talk about that as a peptide. And then last of all are these are some example peptides. So these two, oxytocin just chains of amino acids. And then proteins and glycoproteins, these would be the long chains of amino acids, more than 100 amino acids. And if it's a glycoprotein, that means there's a sugar attached in that chain as well. And I don't have a picture of a protein or glycoprotein to show you. And then last of all are some non-hormone chemicals that have a controlling function called prostaglandins. These prostaglandins have very localized effects because they're so quickly neutralized, and they're synthesized from the fatty acid arachidonic acid. So here's a prostaglandin that is built from arachidonic acid. So there's the arachidonic acid base there. Okay, so steroid and non-steroid hormones are the major groupings of hormones. So how do they have their effect? They can alter metabolic processes because they can either turn on or turn off enzymes, activating or inactivating enzymes that are going to help to produce a particular material inside the cell. They can cause movements, as we've said, of chemicals across the cell membrane. So we can put transfer proteins up in the cell membrane, and that will bring materials into the cell. That's how insulin. God, took me a moment there. That's how insulin has its effect, is by putting a transfer protein up in the cell membrane. We're able to move glucose into the cell, and some of them can even act directly at the DNA to turn on or turn off the production of particular proteins within the cell. So in order for this to happen, the hormone has to bind that receptor that makes the cell the target cell. And you can, or the body can also alter how very sensitive a cell can be to hormones through what's called up and down regulation. So we can change the responsiveness of the cell by adding more receptors in the cell or onto the cell membrane, depending on how it acts, the hormone acts, and that will make that cell more responsive. Or we can remove or decrease the number of receptors that are found in the cell or on the cell membrane, making the cell less responsive to a material. So here we can see this would be upregulation. Here we have 2 receptors on the cell, and over time we can add more, while downregulation, we have lots of receptors on the cell, and over time we can remove those receptors so that even if there's lots of hormone available, the cell has a minimized ability to respond to the hormone. Okay, so how is it that hormones are able to get in, find their receptors, and create a response in the cell? So here is a image of this. We'll look at it overall, and then we'll break it down into steps. So a steroid hormone has been released into the blood, and it turns out because steroid hormones are built of lipid, they don't transport well in the blood, and so we generally require transport proteins to be able to carry steroid hormones in our blood. That's a generality. So but however it's delivered, the steroid hormone makes it to the cell, and because it's a lipid, it can dissolve in the lipid bilayer surrounding the cell, and so it can just pass right into the cell, no problem at all. And so now it diffuses through the fluids of the cell and makes it to the nucleus, and it passes right in. It's able to slide right through one of these nuclear pores, and once it gets inside the nucleus, then it binds the receptor, because inside the nucleus is where we find the receptor for most steroid hormones. So it binds the receptor, forming what's termed the hormone receptor complex. gets right on out. Notice the DNA doesn't leave. It's trapped inside of the nucleus. That's how we protect it. But we can make a copy of it and send that copy out. And what we're doing is copying just a portion of the DNA, a single gene that has the instructions to build a protein. So we send that messenger RNA out. It finds a ribosome, and the ribosome is capable of latching around the piece of messenger RNA and reading that messenger RNA and using it to build the protein that that piece of mRNA is coding for. And so it's a process that involves a second kind of RNA called transfer RNA that brings in amino acids. There's the amino acid right there that the transfer RNA brings in. And for every 3 nucleotides that we have, those 3 nucleotides code for a piece of an amino acid. And so we wind up making a little peptide bond here between the 2 amino acids, creating that long chain of amino acids that is a protein. So what I want you to know from this is that when the hormone binds to the receptor inside the nucleus, that starts a chain of events that produces proteins. Okay, so let's break it down now. So here, the steroid hormones include hormones such as testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. Those are the sex hormones. And then the secretions that are produced at the cortex, or at the rind of the adrenal gland. And they include a huge number, up to 30 hormones that are produced there at the adrenal cortex. But the primary ones that I want you to know are aldosterone and cortisol. So these steroid hormones are built from cholesterol, as we've said. So they are insoluble in water, and they circulate in body fluids bound to plasma proteins, these transport proteins that carry lipid-based materials through the blood. Because they can dissolve into lipids, though, when they reach that cell, they pass right on through the cell membrane and into the nucleus. If that cell is a target cell, then it has that receptor there in the nucleus. The hormone binds to that receptor, and the resulting hormone receptor complex will trigger the assembly of specific proteins that then have the effect that we associate with the cell. And those proteins, they can be enzymes, and that's how we turn on new metabolic processes. Structural proteins that are going to be, they're going to be used to build the cell. So recall that testosterone triggers or can lead to muscle cells growing, and so testosterone then will trigger a process that builds the myosin and the actin proteins that we see in muscle cells. We could be building proteins that are going to allow other materials to be transported into the cell, or it may make new receptor proteins. So for instance, progesterone triggers the building of special receptor proteins in mammary gland cells, so that the mammary glands can now respond to a hormone called prolactin and become able then to produce milk. So lots and lots of different effects that we can see as we build the proteins that are going to have the effect in the cell. So that protein, as the protein is made, then we see the effect associated with the hormone being expressed there at the cell. And the hormone receptor complex may also shut off processes. So it could deactivate particular genes and then prevent the assembly of the proteins that are associated with that gene. So lots and lots of processes that we can see associated with these steroid hormones. Okay, so that's where we'll stop for this lecture. We'll pick up with the non-steroid hormones in the next one. So again, key points here are how it is that we do the activity, or how a steroid hormone has its activity, and then how we can upregulate and downregulate cells to be responsive or